Good Monday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for December the 11th. Today we are reading together in Ezra chapters 7 and 8. So we're going to be doing a few double chapters here over the next few days to catch up from our time that we were away. So let's get to reading here in Ezra chapter 7. Again, reading chapters 7 and 8 today, which fits in well because these chapters do go together pretty well, just telling the story of the round of return that Ezra himself participated in. Remember that the first 6 chapters of the text known as Ezra doesn't actually include Ezra. It's about mostly Zerubbabel and those 40 to 45 to 50,000 individuals who were of Jewish descent who were returning to Jerusalem in order to rebuild the temple. Now, about 60-ish years later, you're going to have a second round return of a much smaller number, and they're going to focus on the restoration of the community and helping the community to be more in line with God's will. So that's going to happen in the rest of Ezra, and then Nehemiah is going to come onto the scene, and he's going to have a different focus in his rebuilding of the Jewish people and their communities and their cities and stuff at that time. So let's read here in Ezra chapter 7, beginning in verse number 1. Again, we're reading today Ezra chapter 7 and Ezra chapter 8. All right, so Ezra chapter 7 and verse number 1. After these events during the reign of King Artaxerxes of Persia, Ezra, Seraiah's son, Azariah's son, Hilkiah's son, Shallum's son, Zadok's son, Ahitub's son, Amariah's son, Azariah's son, Marioth's son, Zechariah's son, Uzziah's son, Buki's son, Abishua's son, Phinehas's son, Eleazar's son, the chief priest Aaron's son, came up from Babylon. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, which Yahweh, the God of Israel, had given. The king had granted him everything he requested because the hand of Yahweh, his God, was on him. Some of the Israelites, priests, Levites, singers, gatekeepers, and temple servants accompanied him to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. Ezra came to Jerusalem in the 5th month during the 7th year of the king. He began the journey from Babylon on the 1st day of the 1st month and arrived in Jerusalem on the 1st day of the 5th month, since the gracious hand of his God was on him. Now Ezra had determined in his heart to study the law of Yahweh, obey it, and teach its statutes and ordinances in Israel. This is the text of the letter King Artaxerxes gave to Ezra, the priest and scribe, an expert in the matters of Yahweh's commands and statutes for Israel. Artaxerxes, king of kings, to Ezra the priest, an expert in the law of the God of the heavens, greetings. I issue a decree that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including their priests and Levites, who want to go to Jerusalem, may go with you. You are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to evaluate Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your possession. You are also to bring the silver and gold of the king and his counselors, have willing. And you are to bring the silver and the gold the king and his counselors have willingly given to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem. And all the silver and gold you receive throughout the province of Babylon, together with the freewill offerings given by the people and the priests to the house of their God in Jerusalem. Then you are to be diligent to buy with this money bulls, rams, and lambs, along with their grain and drink offerings, and offer them on the altar at the house of your God in Jerusalem. You may do whatever seems best to you and your brothers with the rest of the silver and gold, according to the will of your God. Deliver to the God of Jerusalem all the articles given to you for the service of the house of your God. You may use the royal treasury to pay for anything else needed for the house of your God. I, King Artaxerxes, issue a decree to all the treasurers in the region west of the Euphrates River. Whatever Ezra the priest, an expert in the law of the God of heavens, asks you must be provided in full, up to 7,500 pounds of silver, 500 bushels of wheat, 550 gallons of wine, 550 gallons of oil, and salt without limits. Whatever is commanded by the God of the heavens must be done diligently for the house of the God of the heavens, so that wrath will not fall on the realm of the king and his sons. Be advised that you do not have authority to impose tribute, duty, and land tax on any priest, Levites, singers, doorkeepers, temple servants, or other servants of this house of God. And you, Ezra, according to God's wisdom that you possess, appoint magistrates and judges to judge all the people in the region west of the Euphrates who know the laws of your God, and to teach anyone who does not know them. Anyone who does not keep the law of your God and the law of the king, let the appropriate judgment be executed against him, whether death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment. Blessed be Yahweh, the God of our ancestors, who has put it into the king's mind to glorify the house of Yahweh in Jerusalem, and who has shown me and has shown favor to me before the king, his counselors, and all his powerful officers. So I took courage because I was strengthened by the hand of Yahweh my God, and I gathered Israelite leaders to return with me. These are the heads of the families and the genealogical records of those who returned with me from Babylon during the reign of King Artaxerxes. Now we are in Ezra chapter 8. Verse number 2 says, Gershom from Phinehas's descendants, Daniel from Ithamar's descendants, Hattush from David's descendants, who was from Shechaniah's descendants, Zechariah from Parosh's descendants, and 150 men with him who were registered by genealogy. Eliahonai, son of Zerahiah, from Pahath Moab's descendants, and 200 men with him. Shechaniah, son of Jahaziel, from Zattu's descendants, and 300 men with him. Ebed, son of Jonathan, from Adin's descendants, and 50 men with him. Jeshiah, son of Athaliah, from Elam's descendants, and 50 men with him. Zebediah, son of Mikael, from Shephatiah's descendants, and 80 men with him. Obadiah, son of Jehiel, from Joab's descendants, and 218 men with him. Shilomith, son of Josephiah, from Bani's descendants, and 60 men with him. Zechariah, son of Bebai, from Bebai's descendants, and 28 men with him. Jehonan, son of Hakatan, from Azgad's descendants, and 110 men with him. These are the last ones from Adonicam's descendants, and their names are Eliphalet, Jeuel, and Shemaiah, and 60 men with them, Uthai and Zakur from Bigvai's descendants, and 70 men with them. I gathered them at the river that flows to Ahava, and we camped there for 3 days. I searched among the people and priests, but found no Levites there. Then I summoned the leaders, Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jarib, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, and Meshullam, as well as the teachers, Joarib and Elnathan. I sent them to Edo, the leader at Casaphia, with a message for him and his brothers, the temple servants at Casaphia, that they should bring us ministers for the house of our God, since the gracious hand of our God was on us. They brought us Sarabiah, a man of insight from the descendants of Mali, a descendant of Levi, son of Israel, along with his sons and brothers, 18 men, plus Hashabiah, along with Jeshiah from the descendants of Merari, and his brothers and their sons, 20 men. There were also 220 of the temple servants who had been appointed by David, and the leaders for the work of the Levites. All were identified by name. I proclaimed a fast by the Ahava River, so that we might humble ourselves before our God and ask him for a safe journey for us, our dependents, and our possessions. I did this because I was ashamed to ask the king for infantry and cavalry to protect us from enemies during the journey, since we had told him, the hand of our God is gracious to all who seek him, but his fierce anger is against all who abandon him. So we fasted and pleaded with our God about this, and he was receptive to our prayer. I selected 12 of the leading priests, along with Sherebiah, Hashabiah, and 10 of their brothers. I weighed out to them the silver, the gold, and the articles, the contribution for the house of our God that the king, his counselors, his leaders, and all the Israelites who were present had offered. I weighed out to them 24 tons of silver articles weighing 75,000 or 7,500 pounds, 7,500 pounds of gold, 20 gold bowls worth 1,000 gold coins, and two articles of fine gleaming bronze as valuable as gold. Then I said to them, "You are holy to Yahweh. The articles and the articles are holy. The silver and gold are a freewill offering to Yahweh God of our ancestors, of your ancestors. Guard them carefully until you weigh them out in the chambers of Yahweh's house before the leading priests, Levites, and heads of the Israelite families in Jerusalem." So the priests and the Levites took charge of the silver, the gold, and the articles that had been weighed out, and to bring them to the house of our God in Jerusalem. We set out from the Ahava River on the 12th day of the first month to go to Jerusalem. We were strengthened by our God, and he kept us from the grasp of the enemy and from ambush along the way. So we arrived at Jerusalem and rested there for 3 days. On the fourth day, the silver, the gold, and the articles were weighed out in the house of our God into the care of the priest Meremoth, son of Uriah, Eleazar, son of Phinehas, who was with him, the Levites, Jozabad, son of Jeshua, and Noadiah, son of Binui, were also there. Everything was verified by number and weights, and the total weight was recorded at that time. The exiles who had returned from the captivity offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, and 77 lambs, along with the 12 male goats as a sin offering. All this was a burnt offering for Yahweh. They also delivered the king's edicts to the royal satraps and governors of the region west of the Euphrates so that they would support the people and the house of God. And that is the text of Ezra chapter 7, Ezra chapter 8. All right, so again, we're talking 60-ish years later, or 60-ish years has passed since the end of chapter 6. And many people believe during that 60-year period, there were some other biblical texts that took place as far as the events go. Many believe that Esther took the events of Esther that we're going to read here in a couple of weeks, that took place in the 60-year period, and also that the teachings of Malachi, the prophets, they were delivered during this time as well. And it makes a lot of sense because a lot of the things that Malachi addresses are issues that are identified here within uh, are identified during this time of Ezra chapter 7 through 10. They're issues that were true during Malachi's time of prophesying, and they continue to be true during the time of Ezra as well. Ezra really focuses on, as we mentioned previously, as we break down this text, he really focuses on the building up of the people and the community in the Torah, in the law. He is a strong student of the Torah, as we're going to mention here in a moment. And his real emphasis is building up the people's knowledge of Torah so they can then live out Torah, that they can live out the law of God. As we get into the text, verses 1 through 5 show us the legitimacy of Ezra as a priest. And it shows us that God is with Ezra in this as well, in the fact that the king granted him everything that he requested. As far as Ezra goes, he was somebody who had determined in his heart to study the law of Yahweh, to obey it, and also to teach its statutes and ordinances in Israel. And we'll just pause here for a second just to see this important process that Ezra was engaged in. Could not share or teach first. First, he had to know. But knowing in and of itself does no good if it's not applied. So we have here both the knowledge of Torah from Ezra's perspective, the application of Torah in his own life, and then the ability to share and to teach Torah with the rest of the community. If we really want to see change in our own communities and in our own families, it begins with that. It begins with first knowing the will of God, obeying the will of God ourselves, and then encouraging and teaching others to do the same. We cannot expect for there to be great change from the perspective of a knowledge and obedience to God's will if it does not start with us individually. So I need to know God's will. I need to obey God's will. And then I, at that point, can begin to share and teach God's will with others. Artaxerxes or Ezra here within this text shares with us this letter from Artaxerxes, and it just shows us that Artaxerxes was totally backing this entire process of sending Ezra back to the land in order to do what he was to do as a priest and a teacher, to help build up the community in the will of God. Verses 13 through 24 talk about this, talk about everything that Artaxerxes was doing to support this mission to go back to the land of to send Israelites back to the land of Israel. They had already built the temple back up, but now they needed to build up the community around the temple. And he was giving Ezra basically a blank check. Whatever you need, up to within reason, up to 7,500 pounds of silver, 500 bushels of wheat, 500 gallons of wine, 500 gallons of oil, and then salt, and an unlimited number of or an unlimited amount of salt, which is very valuable at that time. All these things you need, you have. Now, why was it that God, or why was it that Artaxerxes was so quick to help with this? Why was he so totally supportive of Ezra and the efforts that he was doing? Well, it gets down to even so in verse number 25 through 25 and 26. I should have included this earlier in that number. So verses 13 through 26 are this letter of support from Artaxerxes to Ezra for the work that he's going to do. He even tells him, you're going to be in charge. You're going to be able to implement the teachings of Torah. And if people don't observe it like they're supposed to, then you are within your rights to execute whatever kind of judgment needs to be given against that person. So again, Artaxerxes is allowing them to be governed by, it seems, as I can tell, to be able to be governed themselves by their own law of their own God. Now, beginning verse 27, Ezra, the author here, begins writing from his perspective, and he gives all the glory in this to God, that it is Yahweh, the God of our fathers, who has put it into the king's mind to glorify the house of God in Jerusalem, and it is he who has shown favor to me before the king and his counselors, and so on. So yes, this is Artaxerxes, and this is like previously with Cyrus and with Darius, that yes, they were the ones who were executing these decrees as the leaders at that time, the governmental leaders. But Ezra recognizes here that it's really God who deserves all the credit for putting this in the king's mind, for being the one who rules even over the kingdoms of men in order to accomplish his will. So Ezra then, in seeing everything that God had done through the people, through these kings of the nations, he says that I took courage because I was strengthened by the hand of Yahweh my God, and I gathered the Israelite leaders to return home with me. So now, shifting to chapter 8, he begins to gather those who are going to come with him. And really, he only gathers about 1,500-ish in total. There are estimates that there were 2 to 3 million Jews who lived outside of Jerusalem at that time in Babylon and other regions. We would refer to this as the diaspora or the diaspora, the spreading of the Jewish people all over the world at that time, due to various reasons, conquerings and captivities and such. And out of all those, again, we only have about 50-ish thousand, 40 to 50,000 that return with the Zerubbabel. And now we only have about 1,500 that are returning. A lot of people are not wanting to leave what was probably a comfortable life in Babylon at that time. But those who were willing to go, about 1,500 of them gathered with Ezra, and they're ready to return to Jerusalem. But 3 days into the trip, they realize there's a big issue in the fact that there are no Levites who were with them. Remember, the Levites were the ones who were charged with the teaching of the law. They were to be the Torah teachers along with Ezra. So they end up going to this place called Casaphia. This seems to be, I guess, a Levite settlement of some sort. And out of those that are there, 38 Levites from 2 different families end up joining them in going to Jerusalem, along with 220 of the temple servants, which were people from a mixed background who served in the temple in some capacity. And at that time, with all these people joining, um, another thing that Ezra does is that he proclaims a fast that they might humble themselves before before Yahweh. Uh, and then one of the reasons for this is that Ezra did not feel comfortable in asking the king for an armed escort, basically. He did not feel comfortable asking him for protection along this journey. And maybe that's because Ezra had told the king about all the mighty stories about how God had delivered them. And so in his mind, it didn't make sense to tell him about how God had delivered, and yet, he would still like some of your protection. Um, so he ends up praying to God and introduces this fast so that they could plead with God for protection along the journey. And the text says, Ezra says that God was receptive to our prayer. He kept us safe all throughout the journey, and they ended up returning. Well, remember as well, they have all of this wealth that had been sent with them, and along the way, they count it beforehand to see how much they have. They tell people that they're responsible for guarding this treasure carefully. And then once you end up getting there, you need to wait again to make sure everything that began the journey ends the journey where it's supposed to be, in the house of Yahweh. And after they end up doing that, everything is on the up and up. And so once they returned to Jerusalem, they offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls, 96 rams, 77 lambs, 12 male goats as sin offerings. All of this was a burnt offering to Yahweh. They delivered the king's edict to the royal satraps and governors of the region west of the Euphrates. And they did this so that they would support the people in the uh, in the house of God and in the implementation of the law of Torah and all of that stuff. Remember, there had been issues up to this point. Zerubbabel had faced a couple of issues at least. So here they are with this edict, hopefully trying to avoid some of the issues that previous generations had experienced in trying to rebuild and reestablish themselves within the land. So all this, looking at chapter 7 and 8 again, really gets back to a couple of main points for me. Number one, for Ezra, if him in wanting to be a positive influence among the people within the land as they return. Again, he had to know Torah himself. He had to obey Torah himself, and then he can teach and try to influence people to do the same. And then secondly, Yahweh. Again, all these men seem to be the ones that are making all this happen. But Ezra recognizes that it's Yahweh who is truly pulling the strings behind the scenes and causing all this to happen. Again, Artaxerxes referred to himself as the King of Kings, but the true King of Kings is God. He is the Lord of Lords, and he truly is in control throughout this entire situation. So the people are now back within the land, as many as are going to be there at this point. And now they're going to begin to consider the Torah and how it should shape their lives and what their lives should look like because of God's law. And we're going to see in chapters 9 and 10 tomorrow that there's actually a one specific issue that is really troubling the people. And we're going to talk about that and how they respond in trying to deal with that issue. So I hope you'll tune in for that reading tomorrow. I appreciate you take some time reading along with me today. I hope that you have a great rest of what's left of your Monday, and hope that you'll tune in again tomorrow as we read together from Ezra chapter 9 and 10 as we try to catch up and get finished up with our schedule for this year. And I'm in the process of working through the schedule for next year. We'll be reading through the Psalms next year, reading through the Psalter. So we will not have a reading every single day. We'll read, I think, 3 to 4 times each week. So I hope that'll be a great read for us as we make our way through that. So please ask that you pray for me as I put that together, and hope it'll be a very good and beneficial read for us over the year 2024. But again, thanks for tuning in today. Have a great rest of your Monday. See you tomorrow. Take care, and God bless.